remember the first time I felt my child move within me. I wrote in my journal, "My heart is your forever home." I wanted to give my daughters the world, my kind of world. A world of magic and wonder, of happily ever afters and fairy tales. I did not want to make the same mistakes I felt my mother had made with me. I wanted them to be independent, to know that they were loved unconditionally. And I wanted them to believe in themselves and their dreams. And then life happened.
After my parents divorced when I was 6 years old, I watched my mom work really hard to support my sister. She would pick us up from dance classes and bring us back and forth to school. She always made sure that there was food on the table and that she was there every time that we needed her. Life wasn't always easy, but we had everything that we needed. We knew we were loved, and we had a safe place to call home. Then, in August of 1998, my mom met a man named Connor. He pulled up into our lives in a red Ferrari and a pinstripe suit. And he quickly won us over with his charm, and his promise that our life was about to become a fairy tale.
I think I was always kind of waiting for Prince Charming to come in and sweep me off my feet. So when he did, I wasn't prepared to say no. With every gift, every promise, I fell deeper and deeper in love. I didn't see the red flags flying. I was so mesmerized by his charms, by his promises, that I didn't see that my shortcut to happiness was actually a one-way ticket to hell. When he told me that he was part of an organized family and that they were angry because he had stepped out of the circle of love, I didn't believe him. And then one night, he called me, sobbing. "I received an envelope," he said. "It's filled with pictures of a young girl who looks just like Alexis, but she's being violated by a group of men." And he went on to describe the photos in graphic detail. He said that this is what would happen to my daughters if I did not stay silent. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do. And so I fell into silence, because ultimately my one job was to keep my daughters safe, and I hadn't done it. And in my silence, he had control, and I was horseless.
My mom had always been good at make-believe. So for a really long time, my sister and I could only see the lavish gifts he was bestowing upon her, the fancy cars he drove, and his promises of trips and houses and prestigious schools. We quickly learned not to get our hopes up, though, because the trips and the houses always seemed to fall through at the last minute. But Conrad always had an excuse for everything, and we believed him because we trusted our mom when she backed him up at every turn. Then we started getting concerned when by 2002, we had lost our house and all of our belongings, and we were staying on friends' couches. Friends whom, like our mother, had invested a significant amount of money into Conrad's business ventures. When we approached our mom about the situation, she told us that everything was out of control because Conrad was actually really, really sick, and that his former partners were trying to steal the company away from him. And as soon as he was better, everything would be okay again. 2 weeks after she told me this, as he was supposedly awaiting a heart transplant in California, I saw him driving down 17th Avenue in his Range Rover. I confronted my mom. She went to the police, and for a few weeks, she left him, until he came back, miraculously healed, armed with a promise that this time, everything would be different. We clung to every lie that he told us. I think we wanted to believe him so desperately because the alternative, that my mom had been lying to protect him for the last 4 years, was unbearable. And then on Christmas Eve of 2003, as our move into another in a string of houses was delayed, my little sister got up the courage to confront him. He exploded. We had seen him rage before, but we had never seen it directed at us. It was terrifying. We begged to be driven to our dad's house. We got in the car, and Conrad was still seething. It was night, and the roads were covered in ice, And as he drove out of the downtown, he put his foot on the gas pedal. He started going faster and faster, and my mom and my sister were screaming at him to please slow down. I was silent. I think that there was a part of me that hoped that if he crashed the car, as he said he was going to do, at least the nightmare that we were now living in would be over. But he pulled the car over on the side of Boat Trail and ordered us to get out. 3 of us stood on the side of the road, shivering and crying, and my sister and I pleaded with our mom to please leave him. A few minutes later, he pulled the car back around and told us to get back in. My mom promised us that everything would be okay. He drove us to our dad's house. We got out of the car. My mom stayed with him.
The next many months were just a continuing spiral into the darkness and the terror that was my life. I lost all sense of who I was, all sense of direction, all sense of right from wrong, up from down. So on February the 26th, 2003, when he told me that we had to leave the city because the police were after him and I was at the fault, the reason that was happening, I didn't question him. I knew it was true. I was to blame. I was responsible for everything that had happened. When he said, it's time to go, we disappeared. I went with him.
A week went by without hearing from her. And then a month, and then 3. My dad and my stepmom were angry at the chaos she had caused my sister and I. By now, we had learned that all of the fancy cars were stolen. He had never been part of a mob family. He had multiple warrants out for his arrest, and that he had actually been married to another woman the whole time he was with my mother. They didn't want us mentioning her name in their house, and my sister and I didn't want to talk about her either. I think we were afraid to say out loud what we thought had happened, that he had probably killed her. There was a part of me that hoped that he had, because that was easier to stomach than the thought that our mom, the person we loved most in the world, had left us. We were 15 and 16, and we were angry. We had spent the last 4 years in absolute chaos. We'd had continuous lies, bouncing from house to house, and her disappearance was, in some ways, a relief.
It was May 21st, 2003, 9:14 a.m. I was standing by the river that ran through the property where Conrad and I were hiding out, and I wished that I could just throw my body into the water and let it drift out to sea and disappear. And in that one act, all memory of my presence on this earth would be erased, and my daughters would be free to continue on their lives without remembering they ever had a mother who had loved them and left them. But I couldn't, so I turned away from the river, and as I did, a blue and white police car drove up. 2 officers got out. They asked me where he was, and I led them to the room where he was sleeping. After they'd taken him away in handcuffs, I surveyed the devastation of my life. I had 72 cents in my pocket, a few clothes, and my trusty golden retriever, Ellie. I had to reach out for help. I called my sister, who lived an hour away in Vancouver, and she and her husband came to get me. It was the first time anyone had heard from me since February 26, when we left the city. I was broken, and very scared. But it didn't matter. I knew in that moment, I had received a miracle, and I was not going to waste it.
I had spent that night in May celebrating my run as the lead in my high school play. It was the first time that I had ever looked out into an audience and not seen my mom's face there. When I hadn't been rehearsing or on stage, hiding behind characters, I had started using food and alcohol to numb the things that I didn't want to feel. When I got home from the theater that night, there was a red light flashing on my answering machine. I didn't expect to hear her voice when I pressed the button.
Hi, it's me. I'm sorry. Can't hear you.
Our story, the one we're really here to tell, begins here.
The hardest part of leaving that first message was my fear that the girls wouldn't call me back, that they would never forgive me. I had to keep reaching out. I had to keep apologizing, to letting them know that I knew I was accountable for the things that I had done that had hurt them so badly. There was a part of me that did not want to forgive myself. I wanted their forgiveness, but I didn't think I was worthy. And so I had to work on believing that I was worthy of forgiveness. So I practiced it every day. I said, I forgive me. I didn't make a list. I just said, I forgive me. I could forgive him. That was easier. He was gone. He was out of my life. But I had to keep forgiving myself. I practiced doing things that were healing for me. I took Ellie for walks in the woods. I wrote in my journal. I volunteered at a soup kitchen. I practiced not thinking about him. He was gone. He was the lie, and I was free. And I practiced believing that I was worth the miracle of getting my life back.
Slowly, I began to let her back in my life. I was angry, but I also wanted answers. I wanted to know what I could have done to stop everything. I wanted to go back in time and make everything better. My dad and my stepmom warned me that my mom was just as much a part of what had happened as Conrad. She was his accomplice and not a victim. But even for all we had lost and all we had been through, my mom was still the closest thing that felt like home. They gave me an ultimatum. If I wanted a roof over my head, I had to break off all contact with her. I went and lived at a friend's house for my last year of high school. I know that I am standing here today because that was an option. That year, I tried to keep up my grades and I continued performing. On the outside, I looked fine. And on the inside, I was drowning. I was leaning more and more on the coping mechanisms I had developed during her disappearance. Meaningless sex, alcohol, food. When I purged, it somehow made me feel lighter. I graduated high school and my mom moved back to Calgary. I got a job at a restaurant down the street. I had wanted to go to theater school, but I was worried about her. She seemed fine one moment, and then the next, she would break down. The life we were rebuilding felt fragile.
I was scared. I finally found the courage and the strength to move back to Calgary and discovered that he was going to be released on parole to a halfway house in our neighborhood. My daughters were terrified that he would find me and do something terrible because I had testified against him. But they were also really afraid that I would go back to him. And it didn't matter what I said to them. They couldn't believe me. It was so hard. There had been so many lies. They wanted me to tell the truth, but there was only one truth that I really knew out of all of it. I had betrayed them. I had deceived them. I had deserted them. But I had never stopped loving them. I worked with a security consultant to target harden our house. We took a women's defense course together, and we always locked our doors. But it didn't matter. As I watched Alexis spiral into her anxieties, I knew I had to do something. I grew up in a house that we didn't talk about the things that bothered us. We never acknowledged the pain we caused one another. So I kept apologizing to them. I kept telling them I was doing my work, and that was really what I needed to do. One night, Alexis told me that she didn't want to live anymore. I asked her if she had a plan. She said, yes, I'm going to go check myself into emergency. I told her I thought that was a good idea, and I let her walk out the door. It was one of the hardest things I ever did, but I was exhausted. I had talked her off the ledge again and again and again. I had helped her climb out of the darkness many, many times. I didn't have any more answers for her. She had to find her own. I've spent the last 6 years since that night in and out of therapy. I've kept hearing again and again and again that we are each responsible for our own experience. But I've really wanted someone to blame. In counseling, I learned that my coping mechanisms are typical of someone who's experienced childhood or adolescent trauma. Every diagnosis has been further proof that my fuck-uppedness is a direct result of my parents' mistakes. As I have mined my past, looking for answers, I've tried to find the moment where I could have changed everything, where I could have changed the outcome. As if somewhere in the past there's a key that will heal the future.
In the present, I've expected my mom to be perfect. I think I've thought that if she could be perfect, maybe it would help the parts of me that are still broken. Often this need has looked like forgiveness. My mom is my biggest cheerleader, the person I call for advice. And I think on the outside we probably look like the poster family for healed relationships. But I have never let myself fully trust her, because the piece of me that keeps replaying the past over and over and over and over has been waiting for her to screw it up again.
When Alexis and I talked about doing this presentation together, we talked a lot about what would it be like to stand here and share this journey. She said one day that if I hold on to anger about you for the rest of my life, I won't be breaking the cycle. Trauma, like abuse and poverty, and so many other human conditions are cyclical and they're intergenerational. When I was 5, my mother's favorite brother had abused me. My mother couldn't hear that truth. She couldn't carry it, and so I became silent. And that became a litany that resounded, resonated throughout my life. So when we knew that we had to work, I was in therapy in my 20s before I had children, because I knew that I needed to find what it was inside of me that had such disquiet. And then after I felt that first kick in my womb of my daughter, I knew that I had to keep doing my work. But it took a relationship as traumatic and devastating as this one to awaken me to the truth. I have always been worthy of love, always been worthy of joy and kindness and belonging. That relationship, it is not the measure of who I am. It is the vehicle I use to get to where I am today. That I can stand here and know that I am lovable and that I love myself unconditionally. There is always a way back home. It begins with forgiveness. It requires acceptance. It requires acknowledging our mistakes and ultimately acceptance that we cannot change the past, but we can heal the future.
A month ago, I felt my son kick within me for the first time. Breathtaking and terrifying. As I felt him move within me, I keep wondering how it's possible to love someone so much. And what if I hurt him? But as my mom and I have worked on this presentation together, it's dawned on me that maybe we do choose our parents. What if we know, long before we arrive, that they are going to be imperfect, that they might hurt us, harm us, and lead us into the darkness? What if our path is to love them anyways? To see the parts of them that are like us, the broken, the fallible, the real, and learn to love the whole. I thought until a few weeks ago that I had forgiven my mother. I didn't realize that forgiving her means loving the parts of her that remain imperfect. Loving the parts of her that, just like me, are human. My mom wanted to give me the world. She wanted it to be a world of fairy tales, happily ever afters. In choosing her, I got a better one. I have learned through her that we are not the nightmares that we live through. We are not the darkness that we hold within us. Our healing has come in the form of a circle. Because I too want to give my son a world. And I know it's going to be a world where I cannot always protect him from others, from my own mistakes, or from myself. But I will teach him, as my mom has taught me, that together we can stand in the circle, no matter how broken, and know that love is a home.